We'll move on now to our second storyteller, who is Anna Jarrett. Now, Anna lives on the beautiful south coast, which sadly was ravaged by bushfires or wildfires, as you'd call them, in January and February this year. Luckily, she remained safe, but she had to be evacuated from her home a number of times. Anna is an internationally acclaimed storyteller. She's a consultant, she's a writer and a teacher whose stories are a combination of traditional and original stories, and she often combines these with music and with song. But today she's going to be telling an original personal story. So let's welcome Anna Jarrett.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. It would be great to see you all in person, but this is better than nothing, hey? And I hope you've been enjoying a week of stories. I'm going to tell you a story today about when I first started storytelling 30 years ago, my goodness me. And when I started, I didn't know much about ghosts, but I loved ghost stories. And I was invited out back. Now, I was a city girl, I'd grown up in Sydney and I'd never been out bush. So the chance to go out back and tell stories was a fantastic experience. And there I was in a little river town called Wilcannia. It's on the intersection of two rivers, the Barwon and the Darling River. And it's a town, like many outback towns, that's full of stories. Now, I didn't know what a treat I was in for until I got there. But this is what happened to me all those years ago. I'd had a day of telling stories at the school and I was sitting at home at my host home with Tiggs and Polly and Aunt Ethel around the kitchen table, eating a beautiful kangaroo stew that Aunt Ethel had cooked for me. And we were sitting and talking story, and I was learning a bit more about life in outback towns and the history of Wilcannia and the history of the Barkindji Aboriginal people. And it was absolutely fascinating, everything that I was learning. And then I was telling them about the stories that I'd told that day to the kids at school. And I said, yeah, we were telling ghost stories and they were really scary. Now, I don't know if you know, but in a lot of bush towns and outback areas, there are spirits still wandering the land. A lot of unreconciled history, a lot of stories that are waiting still to be heard and told, and the spirits hang around. And I was telling Aunt Ethel and Polly and Tig about these stories. And then all of a sudden, Aunt Ethel just stopped and she looked at me and she said, do you believe in ghosts? And I said, oh, well, I don't really know, but I love telling ghost stories. And she looked at me again and she said, have you ever seen a ghost? And I said, no, I haven't, but, you know, I can imagine what it would be like. And she said, would you like to see one? Now, I knew by the way that she was looking at me and looking straight through me with those big eyes that she meant business. And if I said no, then I'd never be able to tell a ghost story again. And I really like telling ghost stories. But if I said yes, I might be in for an interesting experience. So I said yes. And she said, good, finish your stew and we'll take you out to see the witch tree. She looked at me again. And I all of a sudden started to feel a little bit scared for real, not pretend, because the kids had told me about the witch tree. It was one of those big old river gum trees, about 300 years old, that held the stories of the land, all the stories. And one time there was a young woman down there who had 2 children, and she'd had a very hard life. There seemed to be a few stories about what happened. But one time she was down with her 2 children, and the children drowned in the river. And she was so upset that not long after that, she died mysteriously. And they say that you can see the spirit of both the children and the woman in the tree. Now, it's one thing to hear the story. It's another thing to be invited to go and see the story. So I finished my beer. We went outside, jumped in the ute with the dog and held my breath just a little bit as we drove out of town. Now, Wilcannia is only a tiny town, so it wasn't far before we were off the bitumen and on the dirt. And it wasn't long before we were out of town, away from the lights and in the depth of the bush. Now, I'm a city girl originally, and I'd never been in the bush at night. No lights at all. The moon hadn't come up. There were no stars. It was pitch dark. And I got just a little bit scared. I looked around, but there were no people, no houses, and I thought, it's okay. You know, this is going to be all right. I can handle this. It'll make a really good story. And we started driving further into the bush. And as we drove further into the bush in the darkness, I thought, how far have we got to go? And we kept driving. And then all of a sudden, stopped. The lights went out. And Aunt Ethel turned to me and she said, here's a torch, jump out, and we'll walk from here. So I got up and I followed Aunt Ethel and Polly with the dog out on a bush track. Couldn't see a thing except for what I could see with the torch. And I noticed as we were walking that my hand was shaking, but I was thinking, it'll be all right, it'll be fine. And then Aunt Ethel said, we're almost there, turn it off. So I turned my torch off and I could feel the presence of this big old river gum tree right there. And the only thing I could hear was the sound of the river on the other side, the river that had drowned those two children. And Aunt Ethel said, shine your torch on the bottom of the tree. So I did. Go slowly up the tree. So I did. Shine your torch over to the left side as it branches off. So I did. And there in that branch I could see two eyes. Shine your torch on the other side of the tree and go up the other branch. So I did. And I could see two more eyes. At this moment, I was shaking, but I was trying to be really, really calm. And Aunt Ethel said, shine your torch right up the middle of the tree and go a little bit higher than those two branches. So I did. Look closely. And as I did, I could see two more eyes. And as I looked even more, closed my eyes just to make sure I wasn't imagining things and opened them again, I could see a whole face. And at that moment, the moon shone through the clouds. And I met the mother, the witch woman. I jumped up, I ran, I grabbed whatever it was, and I ran through the bush back to the ute. I ran and I ran, jumped in the ute, and there I was, just waiting for the two of them to return and the dog, and it seemed like forever. But then I was shaking like anything, and they came back and they were just totally calm. And Aunt Ethel looked at me and she laughed and she said, so Anna, do you believe in ghosts now? Sure do.
What a fantastic story. Very much in the heart of Australia, where we are very much, you know, in touch with the land and everything else. Oh, thoroughly enjoyable. Thank you very much, Anna.